In this video, we're going to go ahead and create our counter that we mentioned in a previous video. So here I have the blank project that I started. If you don't know how to get to this point, you might want to go back and watch the video about the introduction to the MakeCode website and how we create a project and save it and so forth. The only difference between that video and where we are now is I've moved from the blocks to the Python area. And you choose Python by this drop down, making sure that you have got Python and not JavaScript. You could also do it directly when creating the project and tell it that you're only going to be using Python. And if you are going to be programming in Python, I do suggest you do that because it makes it a little bit better. But in theory, you can switch between the two here, but there does become a point where you can't switch between them. So really for a Python project, I do strongly encourage you to just choose the Python option when you create the file. I am keeping it here for this project video because I want to show you how it does transfer between the two at this point. So before we go ahead and make anything, we do need to understand what it is that we're making. So we should always have some sort of design created. So for this project, here is my very basic design brief. So the first part I have is a description of what the product should do, and then I have 4 requirements that I have to achieve. So the first part is that the device is going to be used by a person who's manning a door to keep track of how many people are currently in the room or building. So this is obviously a very important device at the moment in our current situation in 2020 to keep track of how many people are going in and out of different rooms and buildings. Now the requirements are that it needs to be able to increase some sort of counter by 1 at a time. All right, so when someone enters a room, it needs to be able to obviously decrease as someone exits the room. You need to be able to show the current counter total when needed. I'm going to come back and talk about this a little bit more in a second. And you also need to be able to be able to clear the counter back to 0 again when needed. So this when needed I think is very important to think a little bit more about, because it would be quite conceivable to say that every time you increase the counter, you show the number, and that's okay, but we will see shortly that that could become complicated and actually make the product not work as well. So that's something that we need to think more carefully about as we decide how we're going to build this. So I'm going to want it to be that we can ask for the total from the device when we need to see it, not at all times. Okay, so let's go back to the MakeCode and see how we're going to do this. Okay, so let's think how we're going to do this. I'm going to be using the A button to increase the counter and the B button on the device to decrease the counter. So to have some sort of counter, I know that I'm going to have to create a variable. So I'm simply going to put in counter equals 0. Okay, I've created a variable called counter and I've set it to equal 0 at the start. And that's very straightforward. Okay, now I'm actually going to go above it because that is what's going to run automatically when the microbit gets powered on. But I'm going to have to now define what I do when I press the A button and the B button. And if we remember from earlier Python programming, we have to do definitions of routines above before we actually use them. So we're going to always try and put our definitions at the top. So we're going to define something that is going to be for when we press the A button. So we're going to put DEF for define, okay? And buttons are part of the basic. Now this is something I'm going to show you, but I'm going to really stress that I don't want you to do this. All right, so if I look in basic, I will see, sorry, not basic, input, sorry. If I look in these tabs, basically, I can see a block for running code when the button's pressed. And in theory, if I drag this out and stick it somewhere, like here, for example, it will create the outline of the code. Okay, now there is nothing wrong with that technically, except for now as you're learning, the more you type this out, the more likely you are to actually remember it. And not all programs, in fact very few, have this type of drag and drop situation. So you kind of don't want to get too used to that. The way I think of this at the moment is kind of like my documentation or my help. So if I'm really not sure about something, I can come over here and have a look at it. But I don't want to get too used to just dragging this out because I'm not really going to learn what I need to know. So again, let's get rid of this for a second. Okay. And we are going to define the on, and you can see what we actually have here. It's giving us a more common way of doing this, which is to give us autocomplete. So we're going to say, yeah, we want that one. Now it's still going to finish the structure for us, but we've used the autocomplete instead of the drag and drop, which is more of a common way of doing this sort of thing. Okay, so let's have a look at this bit of code. It's defining for when on button is pressed A. Okay, so when the A button is pressed, basically, at the moment it's saying to pass, which basically just means don't do anything, but it's not going to give us an error. And then underneath, this is the part that links the button together. So it says, when the input of button A is pressed, run this bit of code. And that bit of code is the name of this definition here. Okay, so to make this more clear, I'm going to separate them a bit further out. So here is the definition of what to do, and this here is telling us when to do it. When we get this input of A button being pressed, go and run this bit of code, which is up here. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to do with the A button. We want that button to increase our counter down here by 1. Now, we might first think that we're just going to get rid of this pass and put counter equals counter plus 1, but we'll see potentially that we have an error, all right? And in fact, it's telling us down here that we have some problems. So let's have a click on that and see what it's saying. So it says line 4 counter implicitly has any type, and it also talks about this block scope. Now, without going into too much detail about this, and you could look those up, in fact, you can click on them to get even more information about those errors, all right? Without going into it now, basically our counter value has been set here, but it's what we call a global variable. It's available to all definitions. And this is something that you've got to think more about when you're programming in Python like this than you do in the blocks. But again, it's much more powerful if you actually do it. So what I'm actually going to do before I try and use the counter, I'm going to put global as a special keyword, and you see it's got a different color, and I'm going to put counter. Okay, it's basically saying, hey, take the global counter, the one that's out here, and that's what we're going to be using. So now when we say counter equals counter plus 1, we are referring not to 1 just for this particular definition or this function, but we're referring to this one out here. And that's very, very important. Notice our problems have disappeared. And if we actually try and run our simulation over here on the left, we can press A. We're not seeing anything, but we are still technically increasing our counter. Let's now make the B button. So I'm going to duplicate or use what I've got here because that is still a smart way to program. So I'm going to first of all just copy all of this and put a little line between it and paste it in. I'm going to change the A to be a B because I want to talk about the B button. And I'm going to change the plus to be a minus because I want to subtract one from the counter. So here I have set up what to do, but I haven't told it when to do it. So again, I'm going to come down here, I'm going to copy this line, put it underneath for the moment. I'm going to change this button A to be button B, making sure I do capitals. And what do we want to run? Well, we don't want to do the counting plus, we want to change that so it is the same name that we used up here. So now we have two definitions or two functions that will both increase and decrease our counter, and we've told it when to do it. So if you press an A button, you do this one. If you press the B button, you do this one. So again, if we run this, we can press A and B to our heart's content, but we're not going to see anything. So let's go to the next step. For this, I want to change it, and I want to do a shake, because I don't want to use the A and B together to show the counter. I want to use that for clearing it. I want to use that for clearing it later on. So for now, I'm going to use the shake. So I'm going to use my help. This is what I'm thinking about. Remember, my help to look at the input, and it's not a button, it's going to be this gesture. I'm going to drag a gesture in for a minute and see what it looks like. And it's exactly the same basic structure. Here is the definition of what to do, and here is when to do it. The main difference is it's still an input, but it's an on gesture instead of an on button. It still requires the gesture that we're making and what to run. So I can keep what I've got here. I'm not going to waste that typing again, but I'm just going to change what happens here. So what do I want to happen? I want to show this on the screen. So showing on the screen comes under the basic section of showing a number. Okay. So again, I'm not going to drag it out. So I want to show you how to do it properly. So instead of pass, in fact, I need to get this global counter. So I'm going to copy it from there. I am going to put global counter because I still want to talk about this counter here, not one just for this definition. So I'm going to chuck that special word in there. And I'm going to start by typing basic, because all the commands that I'm finding in here come under basic. And we put the dot, and we want to show a number. So I can just use autocomplete to finish that off. And it's in the brackets here, the parameter that we give this is what number will be shown on the screen. So the number is not the 0, but it's the value of counter. So I'm just going to put that in there. So let's have a look at our program. Let's run the microbit. Let's press A a couple of times. And now you'll see that this pretend shake button has been added to our microbit. All right, so on the real microbit, you would literally shake it. But here we're going to press this pretend shake. And look what happened. We've got a 4 on our screen. If we add a few more people into it and we shake it again, look, we've gone up to 7. Let's go down by 2 and press shake again. We're back on 5. So now we can see that these A's and B's that we were doing earlier have in fact been working. We just couldn't see it yet. But now we've got a way of showing the number on the screen. Now what happens if we go above 10? Look at that. It has to scroll across. So we've got 16 at the moment, but it can only fit a single number or character on this tiny little screen. So once things go over 9, or once you've got a bit of text with more than one character, it will automatically scroll across the screen. Okay, we're almost there. There's two more parts, or there's one more function we need to create, which is to clear it, to set this back to 0. And then there's a couple of little things I'd like to do to tidy it up. So let's do one more button. So again, I'm going to start by copying an existing button because I'm going to save some time. And I'm going to put it in here. I like to keep all the buttons near each other. Now it's going to be when we press the A and B button. So let's call it that. Strictly speaking, this name doesn't matter so long as we use the same name when we put the input down here. But let's copy this to start with. And we'll just put a bit of space, keep it neat here. So on button press, what do I want to press? Well, let's have a look. When we do button dot, again, it's showing the possibility. So we had A, we've had B, now we're having AB. And again, make sure we change this bit of code here to match the name that we chose up here. So we put an A in there. Okay, so now we've told it what to do on an input, which is a button press of the type button A and B. We're going to run this code, which is up here. We'll keep the global counter so that we're referring to this counter we set up out here, but we're not going to add or subtract. We're just going to say counter is equal to 0. We're going to set it back to 0. So let's see that working. Let's run our microbit. Let's add a few people in and have a look at how many we've got. 6. Let's take one out for fun. We've got 5. And now you'll also notice this pretend A and B button has been added. So again, in the real world, we would literally press the A and B buttons simultaneously, but we can't do that on the simulation. So they add a special button. If we press that, didn't look like anything happened. But let's have a look at what the actual counter is by showing the number. It has reset it, but it didn't change the screen. And that is the extra little bit that I'd like to put in now. So strictly speaking, we have all the functions from our design, but there's just that little bit of it doesn't quite work properly. So what I'd like to do now is when we reset it, I would like to actually clear the screen. So in this gesture shake, so we don't have to change anything about these inputs. They're all fine. We're going to change what happens. So in this in this AB, I should say, sorry, shakes are what shows the number. So in this AB, after we reset the value to 0, I want to do something else. So again, it's in the basic area. So I'm going to say basic dot, and we can see we have a function built in called clear screen. So I'm going to use that. It doesn't require a parameter. It basically just clears whatever's on the screen. So let's have a look at how the program works now. Chuck a few people in, have a look. Yep, we've got 5. Press AB to clear it, and we've actually cleared the value. If we look at what the value is, it is 0, but this is also clearing the screen as well as the actual counter value. Now that's interesting, because what about when I do this and I show the number, what happens when I press back 1? Oh, have I done it? Have I not done it? It's a bit hard to tell. So the last little feature I'd like to do to make this a little bit more usable, in my opinion, is every time I show the number, I want it to show for a moment and then clear itself. Not clear the value, just the screen. So again, in this not A and B, in the shake, which is what is triggering the showing, I again want to clear the screen. So I'm going to copy that bit of code and put it down here. But can anyone see a problem with that? At the moment, when we show the number, straight away we will clear it. And of course, computers, even microbits, happen so much faster than we can register that we will never see the number on the screen, because it would happen before our brains could even register anything happening on the screen. So we need to do something to give us time to see the number first before we clear the screen. So in here again, it's from the basic area, we have a command called pause. And we've seen similar commands in Grok, for example, where we pause the program from continuing for an amount of time. And this is also measured in milliseconds. So 1 real second is equal to 1,000 milliseconds. We put the value in here of how long we want to pause. And let's now see what happens. So run it, chuck a few people in. Let's have a look at how many. We've got 6, and it cleared. It hasn't changed the number, so if we press shake again, oh, we've still got 6 people. Oh, how many people are there? Oh, we've still got 6 people. Let's take 1 off, 2 off actually. Oh, we've got 4, and it just clears itself. So to me, that just makes it a little bit more usable. Anytime I want to know how many people, I can shake it, but I'm not going to leave that number on there and potentially confuse myself later on. So as far as I'm concerned, this is now a functional product. We have a way to increase, a way to decrease, a way to see the number when we want to. We have a way to clear the number when we want to, if we need to do it quickly. And it works really well. So we could put this battery powered, because microbits can be battery powered. We could actually take this out into the real world and use this to count people coming in and out of a space. So that is how we would do this using the Python language to program it. Again, it might seem a bit confusing to start with, but you've done quite a bit of Python programming by this stage if you're from North Keilor. So you should be able to work your way through this. And again, it's really about defining what to do when something happens, and then how to tell the microbit itself when to do those actions. It is done on this gesture or on this button press. And again, think of these what are the block areas as your sort of as I said, sort of instructional area or help system. So if you're not sure, you can have a look through these and go, oh yeah, it looks like there's something I want. Maybe drag it out and have a look at what it tells you. All right, oh yeah, I can see how that works. And then preferably type it out yourself so you can understand it in a bit more detail. Okay, so we'll leave it there. That's a very quick introduction and a very simple but fully functional product that you could make with the microbit programmed with Python.